Hi, my name is Madison Clausen, and this is my final project on how we should plan for struggling students in our literacy blocks. Who does this plan involve? I just chose players at our school on the right column. Our principal, it involves our principal, vice principals of our building. They take control of the building when the principal is gone. Teachers, our coworkers, our staff, the district, as well as parents. We all need to understand this plan to help with struggling readers. Building background knowledge of students is one of the very first components that we need to understand. What we do in the classroom, this is our tier one instruction. We need to build relationships with all our students. We need to get to know our students' backgrounds. This is our foundation of understanding where our students are making connections and what they are lacking with connections and what we can help them with. KWL charts are a great visual for teachers to understand what students know before teaching a lesson, as well as their progression throughout the whole lesson. Um, Take advantage of students' past experiences with always connecting students' lives, the content to their students' lives. They can make connections to the content. What do we do if there are struggling readers with building background knowledge? If a student's struggling with understanding of the content, adding different visuals is a really good reading strategy for teachers to use. Looking up a vocabulary word on an iPad, giving them that picture of the vocabulary word. I know this is very helpful for ESL students and students from different cultures. For example, I had a student who called rice quinoa, but when I Googled rice, he said, "Oh, that's the way my rice looks in my culture." And I said, "Yeah, we call it rice here. There's different types of rice, and quinoa is a different type of rice, but that's rice." And so that was just a connection that we made. Hand gestures, making visuals for students to help them understand and connect with the content. Stop teaching a lesson to review important background knowledge a reader might need to know. This also goes with previewing a lesson. If teachers can preview a lesson and see if students are going to have any misinterpretations, um, they can address those right at the beginning of the lesson instead of waiting until the end. A picture walk of the book to discuss what the book is about and make predictions about the story. I love using picture walks to get the students thinking about the text, as well as making connections to their own lives. Reading a book about the park, the students can talk about their version of going to the park. Adding a special discussion time to let students make connections with the text based on the pictures, as well as when during reading the text, making sure that you have that set time to discuss and make connections and allow students to make connections to their lives versus the characters' lives in the stories. If there are any misinterpretations, like I said at the beginning, teachers just need to address the needs right there. Making connections to the Apollo 13 theme. Before flying the spaceship, the pilots have to research and practice how to fly the spaceship. It takes prior knowledge and practice to even attempt to fly the spaceship, so they need to understand their background knowledge and research and use their background knowledge to fly, to even attempt to fly. The next key component would be teachers making a difference for all learners, not just some. Um, what I what we do in the classroom for our tier one instruction, I said follow the 7 pillars of effective reading instruction. I pulled out five pillars that I thought would be good for tier one instruction and two for tier two or tier three instruction. Um, teacher knowledge. We have to be knowledgeable in the content that we are teaching. If a teacher is not prepared or doesn't understand what they are teaching, how are we supposed to expect the students to learn? Classroom assessment and using those daily observations, weekly assessments to understand and to get data on what students are learning. Motivation and engagement. Students should be engaged during your lesson 100% of the time. If not, they could lose out on key components of the reading strategy that you are learning, as well as just not even learn. And that's when the behaviors come out. So making sure that your lessons are engaging and motivating for the students. Using technology and new literacies. Um, if you are a one-to-one school, this is a lot easier than if you are not. But if you are a one-to-one school, making sure that the technology components in your lessons are benefiting students, not just having them play games, making sure you're researching the websites that you are accessing, make sure that they are student appropriate, making sure that they benefit students' reading skills and not just playing games. Family and community connections, this is a big one too. We have their students 80% of the day, and they have their students at home 20%. So how can we bridge that gap between school and home? That is a very, very key component that many schools are lacking. So just inviting parents into the knowledge of their school day. So I use the Seesaw app. That's a very great technology tool that you can communicate and you can post pictures, and students have their own profile that parents can access any time of the day. What do we do if there's struggling readers with these 7 pillars? I just sent an RTI program, making sure that students are getting that tier 2 and tier 3 instruction if they need it, an intervention program. Evidence-based instruction, using that classroom assessments to drive your evidence-based instruction. Connections to the Apollo 13 theme, I said overall the whole NASA program was making a difference. They allowed us to explore space. Not only that, but they prepared and valued all their workers. They made the difference for all Americans watching that day, and they worked together to fix the problem. Mission Control and the astronauts worked together, and then they learned from their mistakes to fix different space journeys. The oral language development, what we do in the classroom for tier 1, I think of think alouds and think pair shares, getting students to have discussion and getting them to talk to each other, having students read aloud to students, teachers, stuffed animals, anything basically, just to make sure that they are physically and orally saying the text and reading it. What do we do if there are struggling readers with oral language development? I said listen and follow along while reading, making sure that they can listen to your voice reading the text, and then if they get comfortable, making them read it with you. For students struggling with speech, I refer them to a speech therapist. I also have them copy the mouth formation and look at themselves in the mirror. I think of the sound the, and I have them hold the mirror up and making sure that the teeth or the tongue is coming between their teeth. So that mirror really helps them to see what sounds that they can make. For ESL students, I have my students start at the very beginning of phonics and phonological awareness instruction. We tie our skills together about how letters form words and etc. Just going on from that, words form sentences. Also that BICS versus the CALPS language. BICS language is our very social language. That's where they're going to communicate with others and build that language. And then CALPS language is more of that academic language piece where they are need to be explicitly taught that language. Providing visuals and music to support what they need for their, I think of reading with the beat, that's oral language development. Connections to the Apollo 13 theme, I think about the different codes and analogies that the astronauts had to learn before going into space. There's constant communication going on between the astronauts and mission control. This is the same for students. We are constantly talking to our students and making sure that we're practicing language out loud, as well as providing specific feedback. Learning to read words. What are we doing in the classroom? For our tier 1, we are using our progression teaching, making sure students learn their letters and they learn their letter sounds, and that moves on to CVC words and rhymes, and then going all the way up to our vowel teams and multisyllable words. So learning how to sight words that you cannot sound out to is a great tier 1 instruction too. These words are extremely important to learn while reading. You can't sound them out, so you need to just be able to see and memorize these words. What do we do if there are struggling readers learning words? Interventions such as Words Their Way, SIPS, letter intervention. We also use VOAC. Building sight words with letter blocks, shaving cream. This is just an engagement tools for students to learn their sight words. Reading at an appropriate level. I said never push your students to an inappropriate level because they get frustrated and try less and lose motivation overall. Fluency, what we do in the classroom for our tier 1 instruction, we chorally read, we use repeated readings, we partner read, just getting them to read out loud and practice fluency and reading smoothly. Listening to stories being read as well as reading along with the reader. talking about pausing at appropriate times. So where to take a breath. At commas, that's a great place to pause and take a breath. At the end of a sentence is a great way. That way they're not taking a breath after every single word. What if we do if they're struggling readers? Intervention with reading, direct reading fluency instruction, such as Read Naturally, is a great intervention tool. More repeated readings and choral readings for students. Practice, practice, practice. Practicing fluency is just the only way that you are going to get better. With us being a fine arts school, I said reading with a drum beat or with music. Music is a great way to build fluency. They can sing songs, they can read with a drum beat, making sure that they can read fast, they can read slow. Connections to the Apollo 13 theme. The practice simulator. They have to practice fluency in their routine to get used to what they need to do before going into space. Moving on to vocabulary, what we do in the classroom for our Tier 1 instruction, we teach words through interactive websites like Nearpod. Nearpod is an engagement technology tool. We teach words through interactive notebooks, and students can have their own vocabulary dictionaries that they add words to throughout the year. What do we would do if they're struggling readers with vocabulary? Accessing that student's prior knowledge is very, very important. Like I said at the beginning, adding visuals to vocabulary words is a great tool to use too. Those visuals help them translate their prior knowledge into a new culture's knowledge. Give students a chance to make connections with pictures and their own sentences. I think drawing a picture as well as finding one on even Google that they can make connections to their own thinking, and they can pair that with their own vocabulary words, as well as writing their own sentences. And if they can't write a sentence, write a word that represents that they think that represents that vocabulary word. Only focus on a few words at a time until mastered, then move on to other words. I think of Tier 1 instruction with vocabulary words. You can have them learn 4 to 5 a week, but with these students who are struggling with vocabulary, maybe breaking it down to 1 or 2 a week, and then really focusing on giving them that explicit teaching of the words before moving on to the next words. Connections to the Apollo 13 theme, the astronauts were taught that the different term and terminologies that affected their journey and their flight. They needed to learn these terms to understand how to fly and maneuver the space shuttle. Without the knowledge of these terms, the astronauts would fail to communicate with mission control and each other. Moving on to comprehension, what we do in the classroom, we model inferencing skills. We do a lot of picture walks of the books to get students thinking about the text, and we stop and answer questions and ask students questions while reading. What do we do if they're struggling readers? If a student is struggling with comprehension skills, the teacher should give students prompts while answering their questions. So if you ask a student, you should wait the appropriate wait time with them. But if they are still struggling with that answering that question, then you need to give them prompts and hints and the text on where to find it. Don't let the students fail, because if you let the students feel like a failure, they will lose all motivation and interest in what you are doing. Make students detectives and look for the evidence in the text for the questions that they are answering. I have my students use mini magnifying glasses as detectives, and they have to look for the evidence back in their text. They love it. It's an engagement piece of an engagement tool for students to practice comprehension as well as inferencing skills. And then modeling those inferencing skills with shorter passages and less questions. You are not going to give a third grade student who's reading at a kindergarten level a third grade passage and expect them to pass all the comprehension questions. You should look for shorter, more appropriate passages with less comprehension questions. Start with the basics, start with setting, characters, problem, solution. Those are the 4 things that you should focus on if a student is really struggling with comprehension. And making connections to the Apollo 13 theme, the astronauts had to comprehend what the alerts were telling them about the space shuttle, as well as comprehend all of their options and their outcomes to those options. Moving on to assessment, what we need to do in the classroom? Well, we do daily observations. We make daily observations about our students every day. We use weekly formative assessments to understand where their learning is at and where it is progressing. We use summative assessments, which are the district, the quarterly assessments, as well as the FastBridge assessments throughout the whole year to determine if students are on grade level. What do we do if there's are struggling students and or struggling readers who are not on grade level? We analyze the data to see where students are struggling. We assign them an appropriate intervention program for their tier 2 instruction. We progress monitor students to determine if the intervention is working for them.